It started with a glitch in the data, something subtle, almost dismissible. As scientists compared modern human genomes across the globe, they kept spotting something strange, tiny fragments of DNA that didn't seem to belong. At first, they assumed it was noise, a misread, an error, but it wasn't. These sequences didn't match anything in modern humans, and curiously, they didn't match Neanderthal DNA either, despite what we already knew about ancient interbreeding. These fragments were older, stranger, unclassified. Imagine staring at a genetic map that's supposed to explain who we are and finding pages that no one wrote. Where did these sequences come from? They were showing up across multiple populations, particularly in Asia and Oceania. Not random, not isolated, consistent, repeated, but from who? It was like finding fingerprints, but no hand. And in the world of genetics, that kind of anomaly is rare, alarming, and intriguing. So, researchers did what they always do when confronted with the unknown. They followed the trail, but they couldn't have predicted where it would lead, or who or what they were about to meet. Because just beneath the surface of our DNA, a ghost was waiting. One that had been there all along. The breakthrough came far from any icy cave or dusty bone fragment. It came from people, living people, across Melanesia, particularly in Papua New Guinea. Their DNA held a deeper concentration of that mysterious genetic code. Not just trace fragments, but entire genomic signatures that didn't line up with Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. Why? What made these populations different? As researchers dug into the data, a pattern emerged, undeniable and clear. Something ancient had left its mark on the ancestors of Melanesians. A species no one had ever seen, and it wasn't some minor contribution. In some individuals, up to 5% of their DNA came from this unknown ancestor. That's not a whisper. That's a voice. So now the question shifted. Who or what was this third human? The answer wasn't in fossils. Not yet. It was hiding in their blood. And that meant something revolutionary. We didn't need bones to discover a species. Just the right question, and a willingness to listen to what the genes were trying to say. And what they said next? It would challenge the very models scientists had built to explain human evolution. For decades, our human story seemed, well, mostly settled. First, there were archaic humans. Then came Neanderthals. Then Homo sapiens emerged in Africa, spreading outward, interbreeding here and there, replacing others over time. Simple. Neat. But this mysterious DNA didn't fit the timeline or the players. No matter how researchers adjusted the models, accounting for migration, mutation, Neanderthal mixing, this new data broke the system. It was like trying to balance an equation with the wrong variables. Nothing worked, unless you added a new one. A third ancestor, an ancient hominin that had branched off from the human family tree hundreds of thousands of years ago, and had lived, thrived, and mingled in Asia without leaving a skeleton behind. At first, even suggesting this idea felt radical. Another extinct human species? One we hadn't seen? One that shaped us? It defied belief, and yet, the DNA kept whispering the same truth. Someone else had been here. Someone who mattered. And someone whose only remaining trace was buried in our blood. So now, scientists had no choice. They had to look for the ghost. It was the ultimate reversal. In most cases, we discover a new species through bones, skulls, jaws, teeth. From there, we work backwards. What did they eat? How did they live? Could they think? But this time, the story flipped. There were no bones, no artifacts, no fire pits, no carvings on cave walls, only genes, Geneticists had stumbled onto a new species without ever seeing it, a creature that had once walked the earth, whose physical form was entirely unknown, but whose DNA had survived inside us for tens of thousands of years. That alone was astonishing. Eventually, a fragment of bone did surface, ironically, from a 40,000-year-old pinky finger found earlier in a Siberian cave called Denisova. The bone had seemed unremarkable at the time, too small to classify. It had sat in a lab freezer for years. Now, with fresh eyes and new techniques, they sequenced it, and the results hit like a thunderclap. That tiny bone didn't match modern humans. It didn't match Neanderthals either. It matched the ghost. The unknown DNA from Melanesia, the genetic traces found across Asia, it was all coming from the same source. A species that had once been invisible now had a name, Denisovans, named after the cave that held their secret. Still, questions remained. What did they look like? How long had they lived? Why had they vanished? And perhaps most haunting of all, if we hadn't found their DNA, would we ever have known they existed? The Denisovans aren't just a footnote. They were a revelation. Their discovery didn't just add a branch to our family tree. It reshaped the entire thing. We now know that at least 3 types of humans once walked the earth at the same time: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. They met. They mated. They exchanged more than just glances. They exchanged genes, ideas, and possibly even culture. The lines between us and them were never clean. And the more scientists looked, the more it became clear. Denisovans had spread far and wide, from the cold caves of Siberia to the tropical jungles of Southeast Asia. Some groups adapted to high altitudes. Some interbred multiple times with modern humans. Some left behind powerful genes that still influence how our bodies respond to oxygen, disease, and even pain. But most astonishing, we didn't even know they were real until the last decade. That's how recent, how fragile, how accidental their rediscovery truly was. And that raises a chilling thought. If we missed the Denisovans, how many other ancient humans have we overlooked? How many ghost species still whisper in our genomes? The hunt was no longer just about bones or artifacts. It had become a search through time, identity, and memory itself. And it was only just beginning, a finger in the dark. The cave that changed everything. High in the frozen stillness of southern Siberia, tucked between wind-carved cliffs of the Altai Mountains, lies a cave that hardly draws attention from the outside. It's small, cold, remote, but inside its dark frost-lined walls, history was waiting. Russian archaeologists first arrived at Denisova Cave in the 1970s, expecting to find the usual remnants: animal bones, tools, maybe a few fragments from early humans, or Neanderthals who had passed through during the Ice Age. And for years, that's what they found. Layers of sediment, ash from ancient fires, stone blades buried deep beneath the cave floor. But the cave held its secrets tightly. It would take decades and a global scientific collaboration to uncover what Denisova was really hiding. Because beneath the cold silence was a clue unlike any ever discovered. And it all began with one tiny, overlooked fragment, a sliver of bone, no longer than a paperclip. That's when everything changed. In 2008, a team of researchers returned to Denisova Cave to re-examine material from its oldest layers. Among the usual collection of animal remains and stone tools, something small caught their attention. It was a finger bone. So fragile, it could have been mistaken for a child's. It didn't look like much, and at first, no one thought it would be significant. But this fragment, just the tip of a pinky, came from a young girl who had lived over 40,000 years ago. A child who had walked through the same icy winds that still howl past the cave's entrance today. But who was she? When scientists first analyzed the bone's morphology, it didn't clearly belong to any known group. Not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. It sat between. So they sent the bone for DNA analysis, just in case. No one expected a surprise. After all, ancient DNA degrades quickly. Most fragments yield little more than noise. But this time, the preservation was perfect. Inside that tiny bone was a full genetic blueprint, waiting to be read, waiting to speak. And what it said would shake the scientific world, because the girl it belonged to was not part of any species we'd ever seen before. Ancient DNA is delicate. Most of it breaks down within a few thousand years, crumbling into unreadable pieces of code. But the cold, dry air of Denisova Cave had preserved the girl's bone like a time capsule. What scientists extracted wasn't just fragments. It was a high-quality genome. And when they sequenced it, everything changed. The girl's DNA didn't match Neanderthals. It didn't match modern humans. It didn't even fall between the two. It belonged to something else entirely. A sister species. A ghost lineage. For the first time in human history, we had direct proof of another branch on the human tree, one that had lived, thrived, and disappeared without anyone knowing. The scientists were stunned. Until that moment, our evolutionary narrative had two major players, us, Homo sapiens, and our extinct cousins, the Neanderthals. But now, here was undeniable proof of a third. Someone we had never met, someone who had shared our world, but left no face, no paintings, no myths. Only this, a whisper in our DNA. They named the girl's people after the place where she had been found, the Denisovans. But the questions had only just begun. Because if the Denisovans existed, where else had they gone? What else had they left behind? Once the girl's identity was revealed, scientists turned back to the cave, not as a minor dig site, but as a portal into a lost world. Layer by layer, they re-examined the soil, the tools, the teeth, and what they found told a bigger story. Denisova wasn't just a burial site, it was a home, a shelter that had seen generations of life. Stone tools from different periods hinted at long-term occupation. Some were simple scrapers, others surprisingly refined. Molars unearthed nearby were massive, unlike those of any modern human or Neanderthal, and they too belonged to Denisovans. Even the layers of ash suggested that fire had burned steadily inside the cave over thousands of years. But this wasn't a cave untouched by others. Neanderthal DNA was also found here, and later, so was Homo sapiens DNA. 3 species, 1 cave, a rare convergence, and perhaps a rare opportunity to uncover how these distant human relatives lived, and maybe even how they coexisted. What other secrets were still buried beneath the cave floor? The search intensified, because the deeper they dug, the more the past refused to stay silent. Today, Denisova Cave stands as one of the most important archaeological sites in the world, not because of how much was found, but because of what it proved. That one tiny finger bone could rewrite the story of human evolution. That an entire species could remain hidden, not in bones, but in bloodlines. That caves aren't just hollow spaces, they're echoes, time vaults, and perhaps most unsettling of all, that we still don't know how many other ghosts we've missed. Denisovans walked the earth. They shaped our genes. They changed our biology. And we almost never knew they existed. The cave still holds more layers, more fragments, more questions. But for now, it offers one chilling truth. Sometimes, the smallest clue reveals the largest mystery. And sometimes, history isn't written in stone. It's hidden in the dark, waiting to be found. The secret interbreeding, love or survival. Imagine Ice Age Eurasia, harsh, frozen, and wild. Now imagine it wasn't just home to one kind of human. At least 3 distinct species once roamed this landscape: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Not myths, not ancestors separated by time, but real beings walking the same forests, hunting the same mammoths, drinking from the same rivers. For a long time, scientists thought these groups were isolated, separate lanes on the highway of evolution. Maybe they passed each other like shadows, too different to mix. But now we know better. The genetic evidence says otherwise. These species didn't just overlap in space. They met, again and again, and something far more intimate happened. But how often, and under what circumstances? Were these rare encounters driven by chance, or something deeper? Shared shelter, shared fire, shared vulnerability. And if these species really did touch, not just hands, but hearts and histories, what was exchanged between them? What began as distant cousins surviving in parallel was now unfolding into something far more complex. And the proof? It lives in us. You don't have to dig through ice or caves to find traces of Denisovans. You just have to look inside yourself. In populations across Asia, Oceania, and even parts of the Americas, scientists have discovered fragments of Denisovan DNA still quietly embedded in modern humans. This isn't metaphor, it's measurable. Some people carry 2 to 5% Denisovan genetic material in their cells. Think about that. Entire chunks of DNA passed down, generation after generation, from a species we didn't even know existed until a few years ago. These aren't ghost genes either. Many are functional, influencing how we breathe, how we respond to viruses, even how our skin reacts to sunlight. Each sequence is like a fossil written in blood. But how did this happen? It wasn't one isolated event. The patterns suggest repeated interbreeding, multiple waves of contact between Homo sapiens and Denisovans over thousands of years. These weren't accidental crossings. They happened often enough and consistently enough to reshape our biology. The genes we inherited weren't just from one ancient meeting in a cave. They were the product of something that happened over and over again, across continents. And that raises the most difficult question of all. Why? Science can tell us that 2 species mated, but it can't always tell us why. And when it comes to Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens, the why opens the door to some of the most emotional and uncomfortable questions in evolutionary history. Was it love? Did early humans form bonds across species lines? Build relationships, raise children, share stories under the stars? Or was it something darker? Were some of these encounters born of violence, acts of survival in brutal environments where dominance sometimes replaced empathy? We may never know the emotional truth, but we do know this. Interbreeding was not random. There are signs it was strategic. Early human groups were small, scattered, vulnerable. Partnering with another species might have offered protection, increased genetic diversity, even political advantage. You needed allies to survive the Ice Age. Maybe it didn't matter where they came from. In some regions, Denisovans may have even been the dominant group, more adapted to local conditions, better suited for certain terrains. For Homo sapiens, joining them might have been the smarter move. And yet, within these murky encounters, children were born. Children who inherited mixed DNA. And with them, a new lineage was forged. Not quite this, not quite that, but something wholly human. Because if there's one thing our species does well, it's adapt. Even when that means blurring the lines of who we are. For all the advantages Denisovan genes may have brought us, not everything passed down was beneficial. Some of their DNA came with a price. Scientists have found Denisovan sequences linked to conditions like immune overreaction, genetic traits that might have helped in the fight against ancient pathogens, but today can increase the risk of allergies or autoimmune disorders. Other fragments affect how our bodies respond to oxygen. In some people, this results in helpful adaptations, like the famous EPAS1 gene in Tibetans. But in others, it may cause complications when exposed to high altitudes or unfamiliar environments. It's a reminder that evolution isn't clean. When two species merge, genes don't simply blend like watercolors. They collide. Some combinations thrive, others destabilize. These ancient encounters altered the blueprint of modern humanity, but not always in predictable ways. The legacy of interbreeding is written in trade-offs, small sacrifices for survival, silent battles inside our bodies, fought with molecules passed down from people we never knew. And while some traits faded over time, others remained stubbornly embedded. Ghost codes, running in the background. Then came a discovery that turned theory into reality. In 2018, researchers studying bone fragments from Denisova cave found something astonishing: a sliver of bone from a teenage girl. When they sequenced her genome, they couldn't believe what they saw. Half her DNA was Neanderthal. The other half, Denisovan. She was a direct hybrid, a first-generation child of two extinct species. No speculation, no guesswork. A living bridge between two ancient human lines. They called her Deni, and through her, the abstract became human. Her existence proved that not only did different species meet, they formed families. What kind of world did Deni grow up in? Was she accepted? Was she seen as different? Or was she simply normal in a world where boundaries between species were thinner than we imagine? Her story collapsed walls we thought were solid. Because if Deni existed, she wasn't the only one. She was a data point in a much larger mosaic, one that still hasn't been fully revealed. Even now, we don't fully understand what these interbreedings meant. We know they happened. We know they changed us. But we don't know how they felt, how they shaped language, emotion, culture. Did Denisovans sing? Did they teach? Did they grieve? And if we carry their DNA, do we carry pieces of those feelings too? Every answer we uncover opens new questions. Science shows us the how, but rarely the why. What we do know is this: humanity has never been one clean line. It's a web, messy, tangled, beautiful. We are not the end of a story. We are the middle of one, a living blend of many histories, many species, many forgotten names. And in every cell, we carry whispers of that past, not just from our ancestors, but from the ones we met along the way. The Tibetan puzzle, a superpower in the blood. At over 4,000 meters above sea level, the air thins, oxygen drops. For most people, the body struggles. Breathing quickens, muscles tire, altitude sickness sets in. But not for Tibetans. For generations, they've thrived in these extreme elevations, herding yaks, building monasteries, raising families on the rooftop of the world. No gas tanks, no genetic engineering, just biology. And for years, scientists wondered, how? The answer wasn't found in lung capacity, or training, or willpower. It was buried deep in their DNA. When researchers studied the genomes of high-altitude Tibetan populations, they found something extraordinary. Certain genes behaved differently. Blood didn't thicken the way it does in others. Oxygen was processed more efficiently. The body didn't panic. But where had these traits come from? They weren't shared by most other humans, not even those with Tibetan ancestry living at sea level. This wasn't an environmental adaptation alone. It was something more ancient, more specific, and it pointed to an inheritance no one had expected. Because the mutation that helped Tibetans breathe where others gasp didn't come from Homo sapiens at all. It came from someone else. In the world of human genetics, few genes are as puzzling and as powerful as EPS1. This gene acts like a switch, regulating how your body responds to low oxygen. When functioning normally, it helps control red blood cell production. But when mutated in just the right way, it creates a remarkable edge. Oxygen is delivered more efficiently, without overloading the bloodstream. In low-altitude populations, this mutation is rare. In Tibetans, it's nearly universal. When scientists first saw this, they assumed it was a rare Homo sapiens variant, something that evolved recently in response to life on the plateau. But when they compared it to the DNA of Neanderthals, there was no match. Then they ran it against the Denisovan genome, the mysterious relatives discovered in a Siberian cave. And there it was, a perfect match. The Tibetan EPAS1 variant didn't originate in modern humans at all. It was a direct inheritance from Denisovans, a genetic gift from an ancient people long gone, but never truly erased, and that changes everything. Because it means Denisovans didn't just leave traces of themselves in our genes. They left behind advantages, abilities, traits that helped our ancestors survive in places they never could have reached alone. And this wasn't just about breathing. It was about evolving with ghosts. Think about what it means to live at 4,500 meters above sea level. The air holds barely half the oxygen available at sea level. For most, the body panics, producing excess red blood cells, thickening the blood, raising the risk of heart failure and stroke. But for Tibetans with the Denisovan EPAS1 variant, the body doesn't overreact. Instead, it adapts. Oxygen is delivered more efficiently. Blood remains stable. Muscles perform under pressure. It's like a built-in altitude suit, hardwired into biology. And it's not a slow generational shift. This Denisovan gene spread through Tibetan populations fast, sweeping across the region in what scientists call a selective sweep, where advantageous traits dominate quickly. This wasn't a coincidence. It was evolution in fast forward. Without it, high-altitude life would be nearly impossible. With it, entire communities could thrive above the clouds, hunting, farming, building civilizations where others could barely breathe. One tiny tweak in a string of DNA, one ancient mutation from a vanished species, and it gave an entire people the power to conquer the sky. But the legacy didn't stop there. The Denisovan EPAS1 variant didn't just help individuals survive. It helped shape an entire culture. Tibetan society has flourished for thousands of years on some of the most extreme terrain on Earth. The ability to live, work, and reproduce at altitude didn't just protect families. It enabled kingdoms, trade routes, religious sites, and innovation to rise in places most species would avoid. This wasn't just survival, it was civilization. And the Denisovan gene was at the heart of it. Over time, it influenced more than just oxygen use. Emerging research hints that this ancient mutation may impact how Tibetans regulate energy, resist certain diseases, and even maintain body temperature in freezing climates. All from a people whose bones we've barely found. They left no monuments, no cities, no languages, but in the bloodstream of millions, they continue to shape the rhythm of daily life, a ghost species, changing the fate of a nation. And if one ancient gene could do that, could shape physiology, geography, and culture itself, what else might be buried in our code? What other shadows live on inside us? The Denisovan legacy didn't stop in Tibet. Bits of their DNA are scattered across modern humans throughout Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. Some sequences help with immunity. Others influence sleep, metabolism, or brain chemistry. But many still remain a mystery. What do? Do they protect or harm? We don't fully know. That's the unsettling part. Because if one Denisovan gene gave a superpower, others might hold silent vulnerabilities. Genes shaped for ancient forests or icy steppes that no longer exist, now quietly influencing our health, behavior, even risk for disease. These aren't mutations, they're inheritances, passed down not by accident, but through ancient unions, survival needs, and the messy history of what it meant to be human in a world with multiple species. And we're only beginning to understand them. Every genome sequenced adds a brushstroke to a much bigger picture. A picture where evolution isn't a straight line. It's a mosaic of ancient voices, some still speaking, and the Denisovans, they may be extinct. But inside us, their story continues, in our breath, our blood, our very survival, and the next chapter may still be waiting. In the genes we haven't decoded yet, the tools that shouldn't exist. When archaeologists returned to Denisova Cave, they weren't just looking for bones, they were looking for behavior, evidence of daily life. How these people lived, what they made, what they left behind. And that's when they found the blades, not crude flakes or rough scrapers. These were thin, symmetrical, carefully retouched stone tools. Blades so advanced, they looked almost modern. It didn't make sense, because these tools came from sediment layers estimated to be at least 40,000 years old, long before modern Homo sapiens were thought to reach the region. And they didn't match the typical toolkits of Neanderthals either. So, who made them? For a while, researchers hesitated. Could the cave's layers have been disturbed? Could tools have been moved by animals, earthquakes, or water flow? But the sediment was undisturbed, the context was solid, and the conclusion was unavoidable. These weren't just tools. They were a message. From minds capable of refinement, intention, and perhaps even symbolic thought. And the only species present at that layer were the Denisovans. So if they made these blades, then the story we told about them, about their intelligence, their capabilities, had to change, and fast. The more they analyzed the tools, the clearer it became. These weren't clumsy survival implements. They were designed with purpose. Thin stone blades, detached from prepared cores, using a technique known as levallois, a method long associated with Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. Except these examples showed a level of consistency and sharpness that raised eyebrows. These tools could cut cleanly, quickly. They could process animal hides, carve wood, even butcher large prey. But what truly stood out was the refinement. The edges were not just effective, they were maintained, sharpened, reused. Some were even modified after breakage, suggesting problem solving and adaptation. This wasn't trial and error, this was expertise. And if Denisovans made them, they weren't just surviving, they were innovating. It forced scientists to reimagine who these people were. Not silent cave dwellers, but capable craftspeople, skilled, intelligent, and attentive to detail. The kind of minds that didn't just react to nature, but reshaped it. And if they could craft these tools, what else could they do? But then came a deeper question. Where did the Denisovans learn these techniques? Because this kind of stone tool production isn't something that appears out of nowhere. It's usually passed down, taught, refined, imitated. A sign of culture, even mentorship. So scientists began to wonder, did the Denisovans develop these methods on their own? Or did they learn them from someone else? Perhaps through contact with Neanderthals, or even early Homo sapiens. There's evidence that these species overlapped in both geography and time. Denisova Cave itself contains Neanderthal DNA in different layers, and famously, the remains of a hybrid child with one Neanderthal and one Denisovan parent. So if they shared genes, did they also share ideas? This brings up the concept of cultural transmission. When knowledge spreads between groups, not just biologically, but socially. Fire, tool making, hunting strategies. Even symbolic thinking can be passed from species to species, if contact is close and lasting. So maybe Denisovans didn't just inherit tools. Maybe they observed. Maybe they learned. Or maybe they were the ones teaching. Because if Denisovan intelligence matched or surpassed that of their neighbors, then we've been underestimating them all along. And it wouldn't be the last time they surprised us. The tools didn't just challenge our assumptions about intelligence, they challenged the time itself. When researchers radiocarbon dated the layers where these blades were found, something didn't add up. The artifacts were older than expected. They belonged to a period when Denisovans were still considered primitive, closer to archaic hominins than modern humans. A time when, according to traditional models, high-level tool production wasn't supposed to exist in this part of Asia. And yet, here they were. Perfectly shaped stone blades, predating similar tools found elsewhere by thousands of years. It cracked the timeline. Suddenly, researchers were forced to consider an unsettling possibility. What if Denisovans weren't lagging behind the rest of humanity? What if they were ahead? What if we'd misread the entire pacing of technological evolution, not because the evidence was missing, but because we hadn't known who to give credit to? This realization rippled through the field. Because if the Denisovans reached these heights of craftsmanship earlier than we thought, then the origin of certain technologies might need to be rewritten, and the title of first toolmakers might belong to a species we barely understand. The story was shifting, and the blade wasn't done cutting through assumptions yet. For a long time, we imagined Denisovans as mysterious, genetic ghosts with no language, no art, no legacy beyond the code in our cells. But then we held their tools, and something changed. A blade isn't just a tool. It's an idea made tangible. It reflects planning, precision, and a vision for solving problems with material. The moment you see a complex blade in a Denisovan layer, you stop asking whether they could think and start asking what they thought about. Did they share techniques verbally? Did they teach their children by hand? Did they compete with neighboring groups to create sharper, faster, better tools? Were they innovative or conservative? Did they experiment with new forms? Or did tradition guide their craft? We may never know the full picture. But these blades don't lie. They came from minds that could imagine, test, fail, and refine. Minds that weren't so different from our own. And that realization changes everything. Because it suggests that the capacity for invention, what we often call the human spark, wasn't exclusive to us. It lived in others. And one of them left their edge behind. Not in language, Not in art, but in stone, the hybrid girl, a child of two worlds. In the deep stillness of Denisova Cave, where frost clings to stone and silence feels ancient, scientists sifted through layers of time. They were looking for fragments, not headlines, just clues. That's when they found it, a shard of bone, no more than a centimeter long, likely from the limb of a teenage girl who had lived more than 90,000 years ago. It could have been overlooked, filed away like so many other fragments. But something about it caught their attention. The cave had already revealed one ghost species. Could this bone hold another secret? They extracted DNA, hoping for a match, maybe Denisovan, maybe Neanderthal, but what they found was something no one expected. Not one species, two. This girl wasn't just ancient, she was something rarer, stranger, a child of two evolutionary worlds. And her bones, long buried in darkness, were about to illuminate one of the most profound mysteries in human history. Sequencing ancient DNA is a delicate process. Contamination is a constant threat. Even a sneeze from a modern human can destroy centuries of information. But this time, the sample was pristine. And when the results came back, the data didn't whisper. It screamed. Half the girl's genome matched Denisovan DNA, the species first identified in that same cave. But the other half, it matched Neanderthals, not as a distant cousin, not as a genetic echo. This was a perfect 50-50 split. The teenage girl, soon to be nicknamed Denny, had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She was the first direct hybrid ever discovered between two different human species. Not a theory, not a guess, but a fact, encoded in her cells. This shattered assumptions. Scientists had long suspected interbreeding between archaic humans, but until now, all the evidence came from trace fragments, blurry lines in a family tree drawn from ancient genomes. Denny changed that. She proved that Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't just coexist. They met. They mated. They made children. Children who may have walked between groups, shared languages, shared fires, or stood alone, belonging to both and to neither. And if Denny existed, how many others were there? They called her Denny, a simple nickname for someone who may have carried an extraordinary burden. She is, to this day, the only known individual who was the child of two completely different human species. Her genome reads like a bridge, linking two evolutionary lines that had diverged hundreds of thousands of years earlier. But Denny wasn't a theory or a fossil. She was a person. She likely had dark hair, strong bones, and the sharp awareness needed to survive Ice Age Siberia. She may have known both languages, or none. She may have lived among one group, or moved between them, or maybe she lived in isolation, a walking reminder of a union that defied boundaries. Her story forces us to ask difficult questions. What did identity mean in a world with multiple species of human? Did Denny belong somewhere, or nowhere at all? We'll never know her thoughts, her fears, or her dreams. But we know she lived, and that alone is enough to challenge how we see the past. Not as a set of clean categories, but as a tangled web of unions, tensions, and fragile, fleeting lives. Denny wasn't the exception. She might have been the beginning of a pattern we're only just starting to see. Denny's genome tells us who her parents were, but it doesn't tell us what brought them together. That silence is haunting. Were her parents star-crossed lovers, Neanderthal and Denisovan, choosing one another across species lines? Or was it something colder, a strategic pairing, a desperate act, or even something violent, born of conflict or survival in a brutal world? the truth is buried, not just in time, but in our own discomfort with what ancient unions might have meant. Some scientists suggest that interbreeding may have been rare, awkward, or one-sided, that hybrids like Denny were accidents of proximity, not acceptance. Others believe the opposite, that hybrid children were vital, that they created new alliances, that love, or at least cooperation, existed between species. We'll likely never know what Denny's life felt like, but her very existence reopens the debate about what it meant to be human, when human came in more than one form, because whether her birth was born of love, chance, or necessity, it left a genetic footprint that still echoes through us. And maybe, just maybe, her parents' decision, whatever it was, changed the trajectory of our species. One choice, one child, and everything shifts. Denny wasn't just a genetic curiosity. She may have been part of something far bigger. Hybrid individuals, like her, may have played a crucial role in how our ancestors evolved, adapted, and even survived. Because when species mix, they don't just blend features. They exchange tools, immunities, ideas. Hybrid offspring can act like bridges, bringing genetic diversity that helps populations resist disease or adapt to new environments. In fact, some Denisovan genes found in modern humans, like the EPAS1 gene that helps Tibetans survive at high altitude, may have reached us through ancient hybrids. Hybrids may have also influenced culture. Imagine a child who grows up with both Neanderthal and Denisovan traditions, mixing languages, rituals, and knowledge across borders that modern humans never even saw. These weren't static species. They were moving, meeting, merging, and hybrids weren't mistakes. They were engines of innovation, of resilience, of survival. Denny might have been just one person, but she stands for many. Unseen children who carried the future forward in their blood. Not entirely this, not entirely that, but entirely human, in ways we're only just beginning to understand. Denny is gone. Her bones, long turned to dust, left behind only fragments, a sliver of bone, a genetic map. But what she gave us is a shift in perspective. She shattered the idea of clean boundaries between human species. She showed us that identity, even 90,000 years ago, was complex, fluid, layered, real. Before her, hybrids were theory. After her, they were truth. She stands as a reminder that history isn't neat, it's tangled, woven, made of choices that ripple through time. Because of Denny, we now ask different questions. We don't just wonder who the Denisovans were. We ask, what does it mean to belong? And somewhere, in the genetic echoes of millions alive today, she still walks. Not as a footnote, but as a beginning. The island that time forgot. Southeast Asia. Thick jungle. Unrelenting heat. Dense canopy. It doesn't seem like the place where you'd find traces of a vanished species. But that's exactly what's happening. In caves, in riverbanks, and beneath thick layers of earth. Archaeologists are unearthing something strange. Tools, bones, and teeth that don't quite belong to modern humans. But they're not Neanderthal either. And they're too recent to fit the classic timeline for Homo erectus. These remains hint at a presence, a people, different from anything seen before. They were short, stocky, with unusual bone structures. Their tools weren't advanced, but they were persistent, and scattered across islands like Sumatra, Borneo, and Luzon. The puzzle pieces kept growing. Some scientists believe these could be signs of Homo floresiensis. Others point to Homo luzonensis, but there's a new whisper in the conversation. What if some of these bones belonged to Denisovans? We've already found Denisovan DNA in modern populations across Oceania. We know they once ranged far beyond the cold caves of Siberia. So what if they made it here? What if they walked these same jungle paths? The clues suggest someone did. In 2007, in a cave on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, researchers discovered a foot bone. At first it seemed unremarkable, but then came more. Teeth, hand bones, fragments of leg, all small, all ancient. And when dated, the results were staggering. Over 67,000 years old. This was before Homo sapiens were thought to have reached the Philippines. Even more shocking, the features didn't match any known human species. Too small, too primitive in some ways, but also surprisingly modern in others. Scientists named them Homo luzonensis, a possible new branch on the human tree. But others weren't so sure. The size, the shape, the location. Could this be another pocket of Denisovans? We already know Denisovans interbred with modern humans in Southeast Asia. So why couldn't they have survived here? Why couldn't their bodies, altered by generations of isolation, appear different? We haven't recovered Denisovan DNA in these bones yet, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and if it is, we may have stumbled onto a lost chapter, a place where the last Denisovans may have held on, surviving far longer than anyone imagined, hidden in the shade of the jungle. Islands are strange places. Cut off from the mainland, life begins to twist, shrink, adapt. Evolution doesn't follow the rules here. On islands, big animals often get smaller. Tiny creatures grow large. Strange combinations emerge because isolation creates pressure, and pressure changes everything. Scientists call it island dwarfism, and we've seen it before. On Flores Island, the Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit people, stood just over a meter tall, yet used fire, tools, and likely hunted cooperatively. They lived isolated, evolving separately from their ancestors on the mainland. So what happens when Denisovans, or any ancient humans, find themselves trapped on a chain of tropical islands? Over time, their bodies would adapt. Their behaviors would shift. Their appearance might change entirely. To us, they might look like something new, but genetically, they could still be Denisovan, and that's the paradox. The island could preserve a species that went extinct elsewhere, while also transforming it into something unrecognizable. So when we find unusual bones in the jungle with mixed traits and unexpected dates, we have to ask, are we looking at a new species or just an old one, changed by time and isolation? Long before science entered the picture, the people of Southeast Asia told stories of little forest people, strong, fast, elusive. In the Philippines, there's the Amamongo, hairy, cave-dwelling beings who vanish into the jungle. In Malaysia, legends speak of the Orang Pendek, short, human-like creatures said to walk upright and vanish before you can follow. In Indonesia, there are stories of Ebu Gogo, small people who once lived in the mountains, mimicked speech, and stole food from humans before being driven out. To modern ears, these sound like folklore, echoes of imagination. But what if they're echoes of something real? Many myths are rooted in memory, and in regions where oral traditions span centuries, stories can outlive the species they describe. Could these tales be the last cultural memory of ancient humans? Denisovans who once shared the forests but slowly disappeared? It's not impossible. In fact, it's happened before. Many indigenous groups describe ancient people that science later confirmed existed. So maybe, just maybe, the jungle didn't forget. And the whispers we hear in these stories aren't fantasy. They're warnings that we are not the only ones who walked this land. Here's the haunting question. What if the last Denisovans didn't vanish in the icy north, but faded slowly in the tropical south, hidden in the dense island forests of Southeast Asia, far from the eyes of modern humans? No cities, no armies, no invasions, just quiet disappearance, generation by generation, their numbers dwindling, cultures dissolving, and eventually a final breath taken in silence. It's a theory gaining traction. We know Denisovans were widespread. We know they left a deep genetic legacy across this region. And we know that islands, especially remote ones, can preserve species long after they vanish elsewhere. So what if Denisova Cave was just the first place we found them? But the last place they truly lived was somewhere else. Somewhere humid, hidden, and overlooked. The fragments are there. The bones, the tools, the myths. Not enough to write a conclusion, but just enough to raise the possibility that the last Denisovans didn't go extinct with a bang, but with a whisper. And if they did, the forest still remembers, buried beneath roots, caught in stories, waiting, perhaps, for one more footprint to be uncovered, the voice we never heard. For years, the Denisovans existed only in whispers, not in tales passed down through generations or etched symbols on stone, but in genetic fragments and worn-down bones pulled from the frozen soil of a Siberian cave. We knew they existed, but barely. No cave paintings, no musical instruments, no burial sites with flowers or pigments, no symbols scratched onto rock to say, "We were here." And above all, no voice. They left no spoken words, no chants, no names, no stories. At least, none that we've ever found. For a long time, that silence defined them. A people with power in their DNA, but no echo in our culture. So scientists asked the question that had haunted them for years. Could Denisovans speak? Did they have language? Or were they a mute offshoot, powerful, intelligent, but unable to share their thoughts beyond gestures and glances? What if they were capable of everything we are, except conversation? That would make them different. But as it turns out, silence can be deceiving, because deep inside their anatomy, a clue was waiting, one that would change everything we thought we knew. At the base of the tongue, tucked beneath the jaw, lies a small, horseshoe-shaped bone, the hyoid. It's tiny, easy to overlook. But for humans, it's everything. It's what allows us to speak, to control airflow, to form complex sounds. Without it, speech as we know it would be impossible. For years, scientists searched for clues about the Denisovan hyoid, hoping that even a fragment might tell them whether this species had the same vocal capabilities we do. They didn't find a Denisovan hyoid directly, but they did the next best thing. Using genetic data and high-resolution modeling based on closely related species, Neanderthals, and early Homo sapiens, researchers reconstructed the likely anatomy of Denisovan vocal tracts. And what they found was surprising. The shape, size, and position of the hyoid in Denisovans, based on fossil relatives, suggested that they had all the right components to produce a wide range of sounds. Their vocal anatomy wasn't primitive. It was familiar. So if they had the physical ability to speak, what stopped them? Maybe nothing. Maybe we've simply never found the evidence. Because the next clue wasn't in bone. It was in their DNA. Inside every human lies a tiny switch. It's not visible, but when it's turned on, it changes everything. It's called FOXP2, a gene deeply tied to our ability to form words, understand grammar, and process language. Mutations in this gene can cause speech disorders, halting the very thing that makes human communication so rich and flexible. So when scientists looked into Denisovan DNA, they searched for FOXP2. What they found? It was there. Not just similar, identical to the modern human version. This wasn't a watered-down copy. It was the same variant that allows us to speak fluently, to form language, to tell stories. Which means Denisovans didn't just have the physical tools for speech. They had the genetic ones too. Of course, FOXP2 isn't the only gene involved in language, but its presence is a powerful indicator. It suggests that Denisovans aren't biologically mute. They could speak. Maybe not exactly like us, maybe with different rhythms, tones, or complexity. But they weren't silent. And once you accept that, you start to wonder, what did their voices sound like? And what did they say? If Denisovans could speak, what did that sound like? Deep? Resonant? A growl? A song? We may never know for sure. But based on reconstructions of Neanderthal anatomy and their shared DNA, some scientists believe Denisovan voices might have been deeper than ours, with a slightly different vocal range. But range isn't everything. The real question is, did they use it? Did they name their children? Did they argue? Whisper? Pray? Did they sing to the stars? Imagine a mother humming to soothe her baby? Or elders chanting during rituals, their tones rising like mist through the forest? If they had language, they likely had emotion. And where emotion and sound meet, music begins. We don't need instruments to make music, just memory, rhythm, and breath. And Denisovans had all three. It's possible that long before our own ancestors carved flutes or painted walls, the Denisovans had already shaped sound into meaning. They may have sung, and those songs, lost now, might once have echoed through the valleys of Asia, fading into silence just before we arrived. No scrolls, no symbols, no oral tradition passed to the present. The Denisovans left no language behind that we can read. And yet, the silence aches with possibility, because if they could speak, then they could tell stories. Maybe they spoke of ancestors, or stars, or dreams. Maybe they passed knowledge from parent to child, not just through gesture, but through words. Warnings about danger, memories of migration, the wisdom of the hunt. But without writing, without preservation, these stories have vanished. No mythology, no epic, no proverb, just DNA, a few tools, and the occasional bone. And yet, when we imagine those stories, we glimpse something essential, not about them, but about us. Because it reminds us that language, memory, and identity are fragile. That entire worlds of thought can vanish without a trace, unless someone remembers. So maybe the voice of the Denisovans isn't gone completely. Maybe we carry echoes of their rhythms in our speech. Maybe our stories are built on top of theirs. And if that's true, then somewhere, in the silence they left behind, a voice still lingers, the hidden legacy in you. Imagine this. You wake up, stretch, blink at the light filtering through your window, and in that moment, something ancient stirs quietly inside you. Not a memory, not a thought, but DNA. Millions of people across the globe, especially in Asia and Oceania, carry fragments of Denisovan genes. Tiny snippets, passed from parent to child over thousands of years, like whispers echoing through bloodlines. You might not know their names. You've never seen their faces, and yet, they're part of you. When modern humans migrated out of Africa and into the vast lands of Eurasia, they didn't walk alone. In the shadows of mountain ranges and jungles, they met other humans, ones who had been there far longer. Among them, the Denisovans. And something happened. They didn't just clash. They connected. They had children. And through those unions, the Denisovans left behind more than bones in a cave. They left a genetic legacy, tucked into our cells. Most people in Europe carry none of it. But in places like Papua New Guinea, that Denisovan legacy can make up as much as 5% of the genome. It's not just ancient history. It's inside us now. And in some cases, it's keeping us alive. Our world is filled with invisible threats. Viruses, bacteria, parasites. But what if your body had weapons designed not by you, but by someone who lived 50,000 years ago? Some Denisovan genes aren't passive relics. They're active players in your immune system. Scientists have discovered that certain inherited variants boost our ability to fight off pathogens, especially in unfamiliar or extreme environments. Think about the highlands of Tibet. People there breathe thin air, live in freezing temperatures, and face unique microbial challenges. One gene, EPAS1, helps their blood carry oxygen more efficiently, and it likely came from Denisovans. It's not just high altitudes. Some Denisovan genes influence white blood cell function and inflammatory response, essential tools in battling disease. To survive in new climates, early humans needed more than fire or tools. They needed biology to catch up, and in some cases, Denisovan DNA gave them a head start. It's like inheriting survival strategies from ancestors you've never met. So while Denisovans may have vanished physically, part of their world lives on in your blood. But immunity isn't the only thing they may have shaped. What if their influence went deeper, into your thoughts, instincts, even how you feel? What if the way you think or feel pain isn't entirely your own? Recent research suggests that Denisovan DNA didn't just influence physical traits. It may have subtly rewired parts of our nervous system. Some inherited variants are linked to neurological development, impacting how nerve cells grow, connect, and signal. Others seem tied to pain sensitivity. A study in 2020 found that some modern humans, particularly in Southeast Asia, experience pain differently, perhaps due to Denisovan gene fragments affecting nerve receptors. But there's more. Some Denisovan variants appear in regions of the genome associated with mental health. We don't yet fully understand the link, but it raises provocative questions. Could ancient pressures, like surviving cold climates or staying alert in dense forests, have shaped brain chemistry that still echoes today? Could the tendency to be cautious, or restless, or sensitive to emotion have roots far older than we imagined? We often think of DNA as a map of our bodies, but maybe it's also a whisper of our minds. Not all traits are visible. Not all instincts are conscious. And when we peer into the genetics of our brains, we may be looking through a window into a vanished way of thinking. We like to think culture is learned from stories, rituals, or upbringing. But what if some cultural tendencies are written in our blood? Imagine this: two groups of ancient humans live in wildly different environments. One faces constant danger. The other lives in relative calm. Over thousands of years, natural selection might favor traits like wariness, aggression, or emotional resilience. And if those traits have a genetic component, what happens when two species mix? Some scientists believe that Denisovan DNA may influence behavioral tendencies today. Not in obvious ways. Not like a switch flipping on, but subtly. Some inherited variants may shape how we respond to risk, how we process fear, or how quickly we calm down after stress. It's not proof of memory, but it feels like one. Maybe your gut instinct in a tense situation, the way your body tightens before your mind reacts, is more than psychology. Maybe it's inheritance. Of course, environment matters. Culture changes. We are not prisoners of our past. But the question lingers. Could part of who we are, our temperament, our reactions, be ancient echoes? If so, then Denisovans didn't just pass on genes. They passed on shadows of behavior. And somewhere deep within us, those shadows still stir. They left behind no myths, no carvings, no chants, no temples of stone. And yet, the Denisovans may not be truly gone. Because every breath we take, every immune response, every flicker of instinct may carry their fingerprint in the way we adapt, in the way we endure, in the way we are. It's easy to think of extinct species as erased, forgotten, but Denisovans are different. They aren't a fossil behind glass. They're part of living humanity. Not everyone carries their code, but enough of us do to make them more than a footnote. They're a thread in the human story. And while we may never know their languages, their music, or their dreams, we carry something, a silent presence, an unspoken legacy. Maybe that's why we're still drawn to their mystery, because when we study them, we're also studying ourselves, who we came from, what we've inherited, and what we've forgotten. So the next time you act on instinct, or breathe easily at high altitudes, or feel something stir deep in your gut, ask yourself, whose memory lives there? Because the Denisovans are still with us, not as ghosts, but as architects of us, echoes through time. Who were the Denisovans? Really? They lived for tens of thousands of years, and yet we've never seen their face. Unlike Neanderthals, who've been reconstructed from nearly complete skeletons, Denisovans are ghosts. We don't have their skulls. We don't have their art. We don't even know the shape of their hands. What we have are fragments, a finger bone, a sliver of jaw, a molar the size of a peanut, pieces found deep in the cold earth of Denisova cave in Siberia, isolated, scattered, silent. But inside those bones, DNA. And that DNA whispered something unexpected. This was a different kind of human, a cousin we didn't know existed. They weren't Neanderthal. They weren't Homo sapiens. They were something else. They left no murals on cave walls, no carved statues, no footprints hardened in mud. Just genes. Genes that live on in millions of us. We try to reconstruct them with algorithms and AI, estimating cheekbones and skin tone from genes alone. But it's guesswork. Because in truth, the Denisovans are a people without a face. A name we gave them. A shadow we chase. And that raises a haunting question. How can a species so close to us remain so invisible? And how did they disappear? They didn't go out in fire, or flood, or a single brutal winter. The Denisovans simply faded. Their presence stretches across time like a soft breath, appearing in ancient DNA here and there, and then vanishing. There's no archaeological line marking their end, no mass extinction layer, no smoking gun. They were in Siberia. They were in Tibet. Their genes reached all the way to Papua New Guinea. Then, nothing. But why? Some believe they were slowly absorbed into other human groups. Their children interbred with Homo sapiens, their identity dissolving into ours. Others suggest climate change pushed them out of the environments they once mastered. Forests shifted. Ice crept forward. Food patterns collapsed. And then there's competition. When modern humans arrived in waves, we didn't just bring new tools. We brought new tactics, larger networks, more adaptable languages, sharper strategies for survival. Maybe Denisovans couldn't compete, or maybe they chose not to. But the truth is, we still don't know. No one watched them go. No final cave tells the story of their last fire. They left no clear goodbye. Just fragments scattered across continents, and a silence that stretches across millennia. And yet, what they left behind speaks volumes. For years, we imagined Denisovans as primitive, brutes of the backlands, genetic footnotes. But then, evidence began to surface, and the story shifted. We discovered that some of their genes help modern Tibetans survive at high altitudes, not through decades of trial, but through inheritance. Denisovans had already solved that problem. And then came the tools. Stone tools in the Tibetan plateau, crafted with precision, sophistication, and age. These weren't the scattered stones of guesswork. They were deliberate, designed, human. But who made them? Neanderthals didn't reach that far, and Homo sapiens hadn't arrived yet. All signs point to Denisovans. The people we thought were simple had mastered life on one of the most extreme landscapes on Earth. Thin air, bitter cold, unforgiving terrain. That's not primitive. That's brilliance born of necessity. And there's more. A Denisovan child's tooth was found in a cave in Laos, thousands of miles from their Siberian stronghold. They weren't isolated. They traveled. They adapted. They endured, and yet they left almost nothing behind, except secrets written in genomes and clues scattered in stone. So now we must ask, were they smarter than we believed? Or have we simply been looking the wrong way? Maybe we are what they left behind. Look in the mirror. You might be looking at a Denisovan echo. Not in your face or your skin, but in the code beneath it all. Millions of modern humans, especially in Asia and Oceania, carry fragments of Denisovan DNA. Tiny pieces passed through countless generations. We inherit their genes for altitude, immunity, maybe even elements of brain function. But what does that mean? Are we their continuation? Did they really vanish? Or did they merge into something new? There's no moment in time when a species suddenly ends. There are transitions, blurs, shared fires, shared children. It's possible that the Denisovans never died out in the way we imagine, that instead, they became part of us, woven into our story, even as their name was forgotten. Imagine a people whose physical form disappeared, but whose essence persisted. In your bloodstream, in your breath. We are Homo sapiens, but we are not pure. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. A reminder that humanity has never been one thing. It's always been a mosaic. Pieces of those who came before, arranged in patterns we're only now beginning to see. And in that mosaic, the Denisovans are still alive. But their presence asks us something deeper. We like to draw sharp lines. Them versus us. Past versus present. Human versus other. But the Denisovans blur those lines. They challenge the idea that humanity is neat and clean, that evolution is a straight line leading only to us. Because here's the truth. They were human too. They had families. Languages, spoken or gestured. Strategies for survival. They carved out lives in some of the harshest places on Earth, and yet, they left no monuments, no names, no myths we can read, only the silent inheritance of their genes. It forces us to rethink what being human really means. Is it art, language, memory? Or is it something deeper? Adaptation, connection, the ability to change and merge across time. Maybe being human isn't about separation. Maybe it's about sharing. We carry Neanderthal DNA, Denisovan DNA, ancient strains of survival layered within us like sediment. We're not a single story. We're a collaboration written across millennia. And if the Denisovans taught us anything, it's that humanity is vast, complex, and shared. Not defined by walls, but by bridges. And as we look back, we begin to hear something. A voice we didn't know was ours. A final echo calling from deep time. Listen closely. In the hush of DNA. In the chill of a cave. High in the Tibetan plateau. In the ache of questions we can't quite answer. There's a sound. Not a word. Not a cry. An echo. A trace of something that once lived. Once loved. Once vanished. The Denisovans are gone. But they left footprints in places we never expected. Inside our bodies, inside our story. And the more we uncover, the more we realize. We were never alone. The past isn't just behind us, it's in us. They challenge our arrogance. They humble our definitions. They remind us that knowledge is layered, and that silence doesn't mean absence. Somewhere, in the genes of a child in Papua New Guinea, or the lungs of a Tibetan shepherd, or the fire in a modern mind that learns to adapt. Denisovans whisper still. Science will keep searching. New caves will open. New bones will speak. But even if we never find their full face, we've already found their echo. And in the quiet spaces between what we know and what we feel, they are still there, not extinct, just waiting. Waiting to be remembered, not as mystery, but as family.